Hello friends and welcome to the tutorial. Gravehammer here. In this tutorial we kick off the Black Legion series starting with the Legionnaire basic troop. After the obvious black primer, we lay down two assistive layers to our model. First off will be the dry brushing of burnt iron mixed with abandoned black, roughly around 1:1 mixture. You can be pretty heavy-handed with this, but keep the layer as a dry brush rather than blocking the whole model. This will help keep the armor black, but gives it a dark metallic texture, which will help tremendously in the long run, as simple black is not usually that interesting to look at. Next, we are going to establish the foundation to the red ambient light. Using Evil Sun Scarlet with an airbrush, layer the areas that would be the most exposed to the light source from the ground. For the purpose of explaining the process, the light is decidedly coming from the middle of the base, so it reaches the inner thigh, calves and the arms from below. When doing the backside of the model, let the spray hit the shoulder pad too on the right hand side to have a bit more dramatic effect. We need to have a good solid red here, so multiple thin passes to build up a very saturated red is required. Don't be shy with this, but as always try and limit the spray to just the areas you want to work with. Now that the basic layers are laid out, we start with the golden rims. Mix a Necro Gold from scale 75 with XV88 from Citadel, around 2 parts gold and 1 part XV, and start working the rims. You can keep the volume of the paint steady when working the very zenithal of the model, but once we reach the areas where the red light is hitting the model, leave those areas unpainted. For example, here on the wrist I purposely left the underside of the trim unpainted but gave it a solid color upon the upper part. Same is demonstrated here on the leg plating. I am only painting the areas that are not affected by the red glow and leave a very rough transition between the red and the gold. This is all intentional, as it will help keep the absurdly dominating red that we have. I will leave this video clip a bit longer. It is sped up to about 1.6 times of normal, so you can see how I am working the golden trim and where I leave the actual red be much more dominant. You can skip to about 3.40 in the video if you don't want to watch this part. For the regular steel parts on the model, I opted to use Vallejo steel and followed the same principle on most of the areas as with the gold, painting just the upper parts where the red does not reach. This particular model does not have that many steel bits, so a quick bash should be more than enough. There are some tubings and skin on this model. For example, this is the aspiring champion, so he doesn't have a helmet on. To address these parts, I mixed up a Screamer pink and Ironrack skin, roughly around 1 part pink and 3 parts Ironrack, and paint the underlying base layer for the tubes and the head. After that, increase the Ironrack skin to almost pure with just a hint of pink in it and do a glaze over the selected skin areas. This will be our base for the sickly pale skin of the Black Legion. Too much time in the war but not enough in the sun, eh? Alright, here I'm hopping onto the nearly pure Ironrack skin. I mixed up a small portion of acrylic medium to the mix, so it's a very transparent application, letting the Screamer Pink Ironrack skin mixture to show from underneath. To unify all this to a Grimdark style, mixed up burnt umber and black oil from Abteilung 502 until you have a steady wash. Dab the wash over the areas carefully, avoiding especially the red areas. Some of the wash will definitely run in the crevices towards the red parts, but you can just pick it up with a Q-tip. Try working pretty neatly with this, as if the oil wash reaches the red areas too much, it will blur out the effect to a point where it's not visible enough. If you see excess pooling on the model, pick those up but leave the wash as is otherwise. No need for Q-tip in any other case, but to remove the very large pooling. Now, while the model is still wet from the previous wash, we can opt to dab in some streaking rust from AK Interactive. Use this carefully and let it run near more immobile parts like the shoulders, the chest armor and the backpack. Again, pick up large pools and let it blend in a bit, but otherwise no need to clean up any different here either. Letting the model dry up, we have a very dark and hateful looking model. Start working some details on the golden parts using a Necro Gold, Elven Gold and a slight drop of Avalanche Sunset to dull down the mix. Using one part of each should net you a nice bright gold that you can use to highlight the trims. Start picking up the edges and some of the areas that would reflect the most as large parts of the shoulder trim. Again, when you reach the areas divided by the red, concentrate on creating a selective highlight rather than blocking this color wholly in. We are using a small brush and pick up mostly the raised parts of the edges. You can continue adding Elven Gold for the mix to increase the golden reflection a little bit more. Same principle applies to the process. The brighter you go, the smaller the area for the layer is. Picking up a single edge or adding a tiny dot on the knee pad with slightly higher volume will net a really nice look for the model. Again, here I'm leaving the actual video clip slightly longer so you can see how I actually work the golden trims. Because the Black Legion is mostly about just gold and black, and in our case more also the dominating red, heavy emphasis on the golden parts will net you a lot more interesting model. I wanted to include some verdigris or oxidation on the model and mixed up soda green with Nihilak oxide on my palette. This should make the mix quite runny and thin, so pop a few details in some of the recesses. This is only to give the model a slightly more deviating color towards blue-green, so be sparing with this technique. When working such minuscule details as in this part I'm adding just a slight amount of the verdigris on the shoulder trim bolt areas and such protruding areas. I'm using pretty much the smallest brush that I have in my inventory. I just wanted to point this out because of course when we're zooming in the model, everything, even very subtle that I do, looks a lot larger and more dominating than it actually is. Right, so helping with the blue-green for the model, we shade the face area with Colia green shade. You can also use this particular wash to help out with the verdigris part on the gold, but only use a very thin layer here and there to add some more interest. If you feel like you messed up with too much Colia and or the verdigris mix, you can easily just revert back and trim the parts with the previous gold highlight. Righto, after Colia green shade has dried up on the head shadows, go in with Iron Rack skin again. Pick up the erased areas but leave the shadows intact. This should be a very thin layer, mostly just a transparent glaze rather than a heavy highlight. We want to let that underlying dark layer to show and not have too high contrast between the shadows and the skin. After working the skin, we are ready to move to highlighting the actual dominating red OSL coming from the base. We have tried up our best to preserve the very first layer of the Evil Sun Scarlet, but there is, of course, when using oil washes, the crevice run and pin washing effect that comes into play might have toned it down quite a lot. So first up we do a glaze of 1 part Evil Sun Scarlet and 1 part medium. This will be quite a runny mixture again, but we want to have the opportunity to mix any mistakes that our wash face could have caused. Highlight the very center of the red area with this paint, concentrating more on the erased and protruding parts where we aimed our initial red layer. Try and pick up the details of the knee pad, give some glazes to the loincloth and the chains hanging out, and the sword and plasma arms. Idea here is to just help increase the red contrast. Now that we have intensified the Evil Sun Scarlet, we increase the contrast furthermore with Vallejo Air Fluorescent Red. This is a great paint for anything red, and we use it straight up without thinning. Focus on creating a more defined red highlights with this one, picking up again at the edges and the erased areas. Being careful and especially patient with this layer will net us a very nice looking details to the red glow and help it to portray much clearer both on pictures and also on the tabletop. Even when there is no glow painted on the base, you can already start to see and imagine the heavy off-camera OSL. The last trick on our sleeve is Fire Dragon Bright mixed to the fluorescent red, around 1:1. Create very small glazed dots and edge highlights with this one over the previous fluo red that we established. Keep it really precise and very tiny and in the middle of the fluo red glaze that we did, as this is much more brighter than the other red layers. So just go over like the very raised edges. And that's pretty much it, the Dark Brooding Black Legion recipe. The plasma OSL was done with the very simple methods demonstrated in the Necron Doomstalker video. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and next up we will do some HQ models and finally the Granddaddy Abaddon himself. Join me on the next one, and as always, stay grim dark.